Good morning. Here you are for a Tuesday Tea-ology as we continue to consider together the meaning of the atonement. Hope this day finds you well. It's spring, and the weather has just recently finally decided to agree with this whole spring business and become springy, and so that's nice. But it's not too hot to enjoy a nice cup of tea, and it's never too hot for some theology. So we are talking about the meaning of the atonement. My chair lets me relax way too much, so I gotta sit up. What was accomplished by Christ on his cross? We have been spiraling in, for there are numerous, what at least one theologian has put it, aspects of the atonement, that many of the theories of the meaning of atonement aren't contradictory, but rather fit together to make a larger picture. We see that in Scripture. But some of them are very much on the outskirts of the meaning, or we might say they're secondary meanings. They are something that the cross is about, but they're not really touching on the atonement, the repair of our relationship with God. We're getting towards the center now, two left to consider. And today we're talking about the satisfaction model of the atonement. And we're really narrowing in on the key to what the cross was about. And next time, Lord willing, we'll talk about the um, it's kind of a big term, penal substitutionary model of the atonement. I'll explain what that means. Again, the labels aren't important; it's the concepts that really matter. But we're getting to the heart of things now, and what defines these models is that they grasp that the key to the atonement, the atoning work of Christ, is something outside of us, something that God has done in history that is objective, outside of our own subjective experiences. And then there is a subjective receiving of the gift of God by grace through faith. But it is something that God has done. The transformation in me flows from receiving what God has done for me in Jesus Christ. And key is the recognition that it is substitutionary, that what Christ did on the cross was done in our place. And that is what makes these models or aspects so central, is that they really recognize and lay weight on the substitutionary work of Christ. Um, and that again ties to the objectivity. It's not something that I have done or can do that makes me right with God. It's what Jesus Christ has done for me and in my place that, if I receive him, makes me right with God. I have an Earl Grey today. It's not, it's Twinnings or Twinings, whatever the case, however you pronounce that. And it certainly is not the top line Earl Grey, but it does have that bergamot. Um, there's a couple of reasons to like Earl Grey. One, of course, is it's Captain Picard's drink. If you grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, and Patrick Stewart playing Captain Picard would always go up to the replicator and say tea, Earl Grey, hot, and it would give him his cup. So that's one appeal. But also just the smell of that bergamot, which apparently is a citrus fruit like an orange. Yeah, that does it for me. Mm. What was I saying? Substitutionary atonement. And today we're talking about the satisfaction model of the atonement. Satisfaction model. And this was really came into its own in the medieval era. So like 1,000 years ago, this became the dominant understanding of the atonement. Um, and I think it really gets at the truth, but it is missing something that the penal substitutionary model really highlighted, and it was against this satisfaction model that some of those alternate theories that we've talked about like the moral influence theory really were pushing away, bringing in something of truth, but not as central as the satisfaction model. Um, so, to put it in its historical place, key figure in laying out the satisfaction understanding of the atonement was Anselm of Canterbury. Anselm was a medieval theologian. So we're talking, I think, 11. Yeah. Okay. So it looks like he lived around 1033 to 1109. So 1,000 years ago, and he brilliant man. If you study philosophy, you come to know Anselm through what's called the ontological argument for the existence of God. Say that 10 times fast, which is just fascinating if you're into that sort of thing. Anselm, these are his major works. He is very difficult to read. He's just extremely profound, extremely thick in his thoughts and processes. Sometimes you get done with a paragraph, you're like, oh, I got to read that again. Um, and certainly, not someone I'd say, oh, I agree with everything Anselm said by any stretch of the imagination, but brilliant and clearly right about some things, and and he combined his devotion and his theology. So I mentioned a moment ago the ontological argument for the existence of God is this philosophical idea, um, basically, that if God is truly perfect, if he is greater than anything else could possibly be, then that he must exist just from that idea of absolute perfection. That may not make any sense to you. You've really got to read it in the whole thing to grasp what he's saying. That's a very inadequate summary. But also important to note is that Anselm didn't necessarily think this would convince anyone to believe in God. It's really a little bit of a misnomer to call it an argument for the existence of God. It was more like adoration of the perfection of God. It was about, and it was set. He gave this argument set in prayer. He was adoring the grandeur of God, and the greatness of God, so great as to be necessary to exist. Um, so, so with that in mind, so Anselm grasped that reason, a brilliant man, but that reason is subservient to faith. That without faith, reason is crippled. Um, anyway, and here he is in the Oxford World's Classics Major Works of Anselm. I love this. I love this cover illustration here. Let me try to get you a good picture there. The description on the back, it says it's from a manuscript. They were so good at designing books back in the day. Anselm giving books to Countess Matilda of Tuscany and to monks. So that apparently is what it is. So Anselm is here on the top and on the bottom, and he's giving books. And I love that the people he's giving it to don't seem particularly happy to be getting Anselm's books, do they? The Countess Matilda, she looks a little grumpy about it up there on the top, and down here the monks. I mean, this one looks like, oh my goodness, do I have to read all of this? And reading some Anselm I can understand. It's very difficult. And this one looks like he has some choice words for Anselm about being given these books. So it's fun. Medieval illumination could often be quite humorous. Anyway, satisfaction theory of the atonement. Anselm was the key figure in advancing this, and it really has a lot of truth to it. And the basic idea is uh, our sin is is robbing God of the honor that he is due. And so we have this horrible honor debt towards God because in our sin we have rejected his rightful rulership and honor. Um, and so the honor debt must be satisfied, and Christ made that satisfaction of God's honor by giving his life on our behalf upon the cross. That's the general kind of the gist of the satisfaction theory. So think in those terms, the satisfaction of the debt of honor that we owe God. What is positive about this? I think we want to recognize the honor theme in the scriptures. Now, it's easy to say, Anselm was living in a medieval culture and he maybe imported medieval ideas about honor, shame, and stuff into his theologizing. It's almost impossible to avoid, bringing our own cultural lenses to bear on these things. Granted, but we do want to recognize that the idea of the honor due to God is a biblical theme, and that in the Old Testament, for example, God is the great King, and He looks for the honor due to him, and so on. The worship of God and the recognition of him is central to the purposes of redemption, the calling of God's people. So God's honor is very much a biblical theme, and it is very true to say that in our sin, turning away from God, that we are not giving him the honor that is his due, and indeed, there is a rejection and a hatred towards God and insult towards him that comes in all of this. It is also um, very on the spot with the Jesus as our substitute and recognizing the that Jesus is the only adequate substitute, the perfect substitute. So this idea of him as our substitute, um, the infinite value of Jesus Christ, um, as able to satisfy the infinite debt that we owe to God. So there's some very good themes that come through in this satisfaction model, as it as it stands. What is missing from this satisfaction model? Why are we not satisfied with the satisfaction model and say, okay, that sounds about right. That's what we've done. Uh, I think what we want to recognize, though, is that, and maybe this is where Anselm's medieval lens led him down, that there are, while the honor of God is certainly a biblical theme, that we can say this is, yes, this is reconciled in the atoning work of Christ, his substitute for us. Um, that there are even more prominent themes that more directly touch on it: righteousness, justice, holiness. That it is not just about the honor of God, the great King, though it is, but also it is about the offense against the righteousness of God. That the wickedness of sin stands in profound contrast to the holy purity of God. That God is a God of justice, and his justice and righteousness is a very strong theme in the scriptures, and that it is the substitution of Christ is not um, primarily, not most centrally pictured in the Bible as a matter of this honor substitution, but rather as a dealing with sin and wickedness, a washing away of unrighteousness, a cleansing of the person, a bearing of the punishment due to sin. And that's where our final model, we'll talk about the penal substitutionary model, really hits the nail on the head. But before going on to that, we do want to recognize what a fantastic, I mean, what a wonderful amount of clarity it really was to recognize the substitutionary significance, and that a debt was being paid, that our failures were made up for and covered by the giving of Christ on our behalf as a substitute in our place, because that really does hit so much of the biblical themes, and especially when you consider the build up towards the cross, the whole system of the sacrifices of the Old Testament and everything that went along with it, the priesthood and the temple and the law and all of that, surrounded this. The idea that when I sin, there's a price to be paid. If it's not my blood to be shed for my sin, there's got to be a substitute. The whole sacrificial institution taught that, and the satisfaction model really caught that uh, uh, in a way that, the ransom model, the older ransom model, certainly had a grasp on that too. But with the satisfaction model, we are coming close to the heart of things. But it would be, and again, we don't want to just break history into all these periods. There were, the history is made up of many people who grasp things. But the real prominence and movement from there to a grasp on how the atonement dealt with sin, and how the righteous wrath of God upon sin was satisfied. That was a movement that really, there was an achievement in what's called the Reformation, and that then has now become solidified in evangelical Christianity. And Lord willing, we will talk about that next week. But you, for now, enjoy these springy days, enjoy your tea, enjoy your week. God bless you. We'll see you.